That sounded relatively routine, and it felt relatively routine. A routine dispatching of the Miami Heat, 111-92 at the Kaseya Center in Miami. This one felt like it was easy watching in a way. In fact, maybe easy not watching because you got to basically midway through the second quarter, and it felt like it was OVER over.
Let me tell you something. Both teams coming off a back-to-back, but Miami had a double overtime back-to-back win at Atlanta. Here's the deal. It's hard to beat Miami in Miami because that's their home, and they kind of try to protect their house a little bit. Pat Riley sitting in the crowd. But the Mavericks not only beat them, they beat them down. They beat them every which way imaginable. And then, the Heat tried to make something out of it in the third quarter, but the Mavericks kept a 8-point lead, 10-point lead, kicked it back up to 17, 18, whatever it took. But it was a nice coast to get that 50th victory. And to show you how significant a 50-win season is for the Dallas Mavericks, before Jason Kidd became the head coach of the Mavericks 3 years ago.
Yes.
And this is his second 50-win season in 3 years.
Yeah, 52 wins, which they can still hit, but 52 wins what happened 2 years ago when they went to the Western Conference Finals.
Before Jason Kidd got those 52 wins 2 years ago and 50 wins this year, the Mavericks had only had one 50-win season in the last 10 years.
And for those who are not super into basketball, I feel like that's the delineating mark of like a really good season for the most part, 50 wins.
Exactly. And if you're looking at like MVP races and stuff, and again, to me, this is Jokic's MVP to lose because he has had the lead the entire year, and it would be wonderful if Luka were to win it. But if you don't get the 50 wins, they're going to dismiss that too. They're probably going to dismiss it anyway. But it's a real notch in the whole team's belt to say we won 50 games, and they've never had this season a record below 500. And we're talking about a team that led the league in player injury games and most different starting lineups. This starting lineup that they've had since the trade, oh my goodness, they've only lost 2 games.
Yeah, it's been incredible with these guys. And as you mentioned, and rightfully so, both these teams came into that game last night in Miami off of back-to-backs.
And Miami needed it badly to kind of control their play-in situation.
Yes, absolutely. And you're also right that Miami had a double overtime game. Early on in this game, the Mavericks jumped all over them. And through the course of watching this game, I was watching this with some folks, and I turned to them and I said, this does not look like fatigue, right? Like, I know the fatigue will show up, but in the first and second quarter, the Miami Heat looked sloppy and like mentally sloppy as opposed to physical. Now, of course, fatigue can show up mentally. I'm not trying to, forget that portion of this, but they just looked like they were not of the right caliber or of the same caliber as the Dallas Mavericks, which is super encouraging. And we've seen that. I'm not going to use this game to make that point. There's been 15, 20 games at this point where you can make that point about the ways that the Mavericks have leveled up in a way. And I think that leads into what I feel is really interesting, which is now you have secured this situation. There's no moving down enough. There's no moving up enough. You are going to be matched up with the Los Angeles Clippers in the first round.
One way or the other, home court advantage or not, the Mavericks can get the 4th spot if they win their last 2 games and the Clippers lose their last 2 games. The Clippers going to win those last 2 games, or at least win one of them, because they play at home against Utah and they play at home against the Rockets. Neither one of those teams have nothing to play for. They're just ready to go Cancun right now.
Although the Rockets might keep playing just because that's a cultural change that they've had.
They want to show that they got something, but they're not playing for a play-in. With that being said, it means a lot for the Clippers to have that home court advantage. As far as the Mavericks concerned, their last 2 games, they'll play Detroit at home tomorrow night against at the American Airlines Center, and then they'll play at Oklahoma City Sunday afternoon. You mentioned the Miami game. The one caveat I want to mention about that to show you how much of a beatdown that was, Miami at home averaged 112 points a game. They only scored 92. And that's significant because the Dallas Mavericks have been holding teams below their average ever since the trade deadline. Ever since Kyrie came back from his thumb injury a couple of games before that on February 6th, the Mavericks have been running the table. And this should not be a total surprise. It's good news, don't get me wrong. Their dominance has been amazing. But they did this 2 years ago when they went to the Western Conference Finals. People conveniently forget that team, before they made the trade with Porzingis and brought in Spencer Dinwiddie and company, that team wound up with the 3rd best defense in the entire NBA from January on. The 3rd best. And again, that team wasn't as good as this year's team.
And can I also interest you in a the 1920 season, 2019-2020. I'm just going to say the whole thing because I say 1920, people are like, oh, back when Two Shoes Johnson was playing. No,
you mean back in the pandemic?
Right. No, literally, because that was the bubble, and it was Luka Doncic's first playoffs, and they saw in the Western Conference first round. The Clippers. And it was what was that? That one was a 6-game series, correct? The first one?
Yeah, and that was the game that I think one of the big turning points of that game was Marquise Morris' brother, Marcus Morris.
Yes.
Was trying to step on Luka's injured foot, and he and Porzingis got into it because Porzingis was defending his boy, and Porzingis got hurt and could not finish that series, and he wound up not even being able to start the first part of the next season. So that was significant for him. It was significant for the Mavericks because they looked really, really good until Porzingis got hurt. And again, Luka had one of those step-back threes that won a game, and everybody went crazy in the bubble. All Figment people in the crowd went crazy. You know, the virtual crowd went crazy. I was in that virtual crowd. I was doing stuff.
You were. I remember that.
Yes, I was. And it was a lot of fun. But the players were like, we could hear the virtual people, but it was crazy down there in Orlando.
Right. Very different from then to now in that aspect, but also the team. I think my guy Landon Thomas, who covers the Mavs for Mavs,
he's a great
Mavs fan for life, also very tall. Very tall.
He could play somewhere.
We need to get him out here somewhere. But, I mean, there was a time where you might have actually told Landon, hey, suit up and get out here. Can I give you the minutes leaders from the 2020 season? Sure. Actually, I mentioned Landon because I did want to mention that he said, and he's right in this, Luka Doncic is the only starter that remains from the last time that these two teams played in the playoffs, right? Like, he's the only starter that remains.
And they've played, this is going to be the third time in 5 years. Go ahead.
But here are, and this is, I understand this is the first meeting, not the second meeting that happened, the year after?
Right. It was 2 years in a row.
But Luka Doncic, obviously, minutes leader in that series. Tim Hardaway Jr. got the second most minutes in that series.
In the bubble.
Maxi Kleber got the third most minutes. You had Dorian Finney-Smith.
Yep.
Then you had Seth Curry. Then you had Trey Burke. Like, those were your minutes leaders.
Yeah, Trey Burke made a statement, got himself another contract for the next season.
Right, like, those were your minutes leaders that first time where you took them fairly deep. You took them to a 6-game series. Luka Doncic really announced himself in a big way. That's where we got the bang from Breen. And then you have the next series, next year, where you take them to 7. And even then, that is if you look at that roster, it does not compare to what they have put together here. I'm super excited for this series because the Clippers have gotten better. I think they have 4 players that are going to be in consideration for
the
Hall of Fame eventually.
Yeah, Paul George, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and of course Kawhi Leonard.
But when you talk about the high end of this, you have 2 of the 3 best players in this series, I believe. And you have the best player in this series in addition to also, right? Because in the past you could have said that about Luka Doncic in some of these series. In addition, also having a core around him that works really well and is streamlined.
Exactly.
And this is a really fun first test to see in the first round.
What's interesting about this matchup, like I said, third time in 5 years, first time in a couple of years. Last year, the Mavericks didn't make the playoffs. And the year before, the Mavericks did not play the Clippers on their way to the Western Conference Finals.
They went through Utah, Phoenix, and then ultimately lost to Golden State.
Yeah. So here's what's interesting about this particular matchup. The difference. Back then, when the Mavericks took the Clippers to 7 games, the Mavericks stole a game in L.A., game 2, and they tied the thing up. Porzingis hit an open corner 3. Luka was gassed in the fourth quarter, but Porzingis hit that wide open corner 3. They get back to Dallas. They were stealing game 3. They had a 30-point lead. And Carlisle said, you know what? I'm going to rest Luka because I don't want him to be gassed in the fourth quarter again. He puts in Brunson, who did not play in the bubble. The year before, he had an injured shoulder. He didn't play at all. He puts in Brunson, and that's when Kawhi and Paul George started cooking. They cooked Jalen Brunson.
Yeah.
And Luka was really, really upset that he got pulled out of that game. He was really, really mad about that. They lose the game barely. And like I said, Kawhi he looked like Toronto Kawhi. He looked like the Spurs Kawhi. He looked like NBA Finals MVP Kawhi.
And to his credit, anytime he plays in the postseason, he largely gets to that point.
Right. And for the Mavericks, you had Luka, but then Carlisle decided Rick decided he's going to put Porzingis in a corner.
Right.
Spread the floor, stay over there. So he wasn't utilizing Porzingis very much. Right after that series ended, that's when Rick Carlisle said, you know what? I think Jason Kidd could coach this team better than me right now. I play with Larry Bird. I recognize the greatness of Luka Doncic, but micromanages. You know what I'm saying? And he needed to let Luka do his thing. And Luka needed to do his thing and explore his talents. And Rick said, I'm going to Indiana. J. Kidd came in. And that exact next year, they go to the Western Conference Finals and win 52 games.
I'm glad you mentioned Jalen Brunson, and I'm not trying to, knock the young man because at that point there were some things that needed to be worked on, and
in fact, he never started under Rick Carlisle.
That's right, and you especially in defensively,
Jason Kidd brought the best out of.
But
Brunson.
But I did want to mention, especially defensively, he was an opportunity in a place where you could pick on. The Mavericks have less of those, and even if they do have those opportunities, you have a nice backstop to help you out. I'm super excited.
The X factor in this series, real quick to me, is going to be James Harden. Because playoff Harden, I do not trust, I do not like, but this is a first-round series. His legs should not be gassed. Kawhi's got a back situation. He's got a knee situation. We'll see if we get real playoff Kawhi. But I'm stoked for this. The Clippers have the home court advantage for now, and I think they'll probably get it, so the first couple of games will be there.
We still got a whole week, I think a little bit more before we get an opportunity to really delve into this.
They got the play-in first.
So we'll try and break this down even further here on the Get Right, right here on 105 through the Fan. But I know that I'm super excited. I know that I see someone who is like, the trilogy is exciting from the 2 and 4, but I can't help but feel we're going to play, we're just playing to run through Denver, as Denver seems like they are probably going to get the 1 seed, and you might have to go through them in the second round.
I got to make this one last note about this trilogy because you're like, the Clippers, why we have to play the Clippers again? Buddy, my name's Jonathan. I was with him last night. And he said, you know what? It's destiny. It's no different than the Mavericks had to go through Phoenix. Remember, the Suns owned the Mavericks for like 6 years. You could never beat the Suns in Phoenix until guess what happened in Game 7? They whooped them backwards. They set the Suns. So you got to go through the Clippers to get that out your system too.
It'll be a nice chapter in the story that is Luka Doncic's ascension as a transcendent player in the league. If you, I mean, from a future perspective, looking backward, that would be really cool to see that in that way. So that's what's locked in. Clippers, Mavericks. That one is going to happen in the first round. Super excited to see it. A little bit of time before we get there, and we will break that down here on the Fan. Coming up next, though, let's go around.